So, I just spent about 10 hours inside REANIMAL, the new horror game from Tarsier Studios. They're the team behind Little Nightmares. And I'm going to be honest, this game's not what I expected. It's darker, uglier, it's more ambitious, and in some ways it's also more flawed. But it's also one of the most disturbing atmospheric experiences I've experienced in a long time. So today I'm going to break down everything. The story, the gameplay, the horror, the co-op, the technical side, along with the pacing. There's no endgame spoilers, just what you're going to experience early to mid playthrough. So let's get into it. At its core, REANIMAL's about two kids, a brother and a sister, trying to rescue their missing friends and escape this twisted version of their home island. And that's it, that's the pitch. But like Tarsier's previous games, the story is almost entirely wordless. Nobody sits you down and explains what's happening, and there's no cutscenes full of exposition, no lore dumps, and no radio chatter. Instead, everything's told through what you see. Burned out towns, abandoned schools, rotting farms, and war-torn environments. And animals that are very, very wrong. You get to piece together that narrative from fragments, through environmental details and visual storytelling, symbolism, and some deeply uncomfortable imagery. And sometimes it works really beautifully, but at other times it can feel just a little bit confusing. There are moments in the game that genuinely hit emotionally. Little gestures between the siblings, for example, like holding hands, pulling each other up, and hesitating before entering danger. They do a lot of the heavy lifting, and you can feel their fear and their dependence on each other without a single line of dialogue. But the bigger picture, it's a little bit more murky. The game introduces ideas and horrors that don't always connect cleanly, and you'll encounter something incredibly disturbing and think maybe this is important, but then you never really hear anything of it again. And it starts to feel less like one cohesive story and much more like a series of nightmare episodes that have been stitched together. Now, some people are going to love that ambiguity, but others are going to feel like the game's withholding too much. Personally, I was intrigued, but also a little unsatisfied. If there's one thing that REANIMAL does absolutely nail, it's the world. It's absolutely horrifying, but in a really grounded way. And you get to explore places that feel real. Industrial facilities, fishing villages, collapsed infrastructure, flooded coastal zones, and farms turned into something grotesque. Every area tells a story without saying a word, and you're constantly asking what happened here? Why is everything like this? And where did everyone go? Early on, you get access to a boat, and that lets you travel between islands and locations in a semi-open way, which is a big shift from the strictly linear design of the Little Nightmares series. And on paper that sounds exciting, but in practice it's a bit of a mixed bag. Because the added freedom makes the world feel larger and more believable. You're not just moving down a corridor of horror anymore. You're actually navigating a place. But with that openness comes some problems. Navigation can feel confusing, and environmental cues aren't always clear. As a result, backtracking can feel tedious, and the boat controls aren't always that great. Sometimes you'll spend several minutes just wondering if you're going in the right direction, or whether you've missed something obvious. And that doesn't ruin the experience, but it does interrupt the tension. And tension is where this game shines. Mechanically, REANIMAL sits somewhere between a cinematic platformer, a stealth game, and a survival horror experience. Movement feels weighty, and that fits the tone. These are small kids in a huge hostile world, and you feel that vulnerability in how they move. Climbing, pushing objects, and squeezing through spaces all feels intuitive, but the cinematic camera does sometimes work against you. Depth perception can be a little bit tricky, and there were definitely moments where I missed jumps that felt like I shouldn't have missed. Most puzzles revolve around the environment, finding keys, moving objects, operating mechanisms, and coordinating the actions between the two kids. They're rarely difficult, and instead they serve the pacing, giving you something to do between moments of horror. The best puzzles are the ones where danger is present whilst you're trying to solve them, because that pressure makes even simple tasks feel intense. And this is classic Tarsier, sneaking past massive enemies, hiding behind objects, and timing your movements while something hunts you. These sequences are genuinely stressful in the best way, and they feel a little less scripted than before. Enemies don't always move in predictable patterns, which adds unpredictability. But yes, trial and error is still very much a big part of the design. You will die. A lot. Sometimes because you make a mistake, and sometimes just because the game expects you to learn through failure. Unlike Little Nightmares, the game introduces light combat though, and you can use improvised tools or environmental hazards to fend off certain threats. But fend off is the key phrase here. Combat feels clumsy and intentionally desperate. It's not meant to empower you, and it's meant to make you feel barely capable of surviving. Mechanically, this is still the weakest part of the gameplay. Hits don't always feel precise, and encounters involving combat are noticeably less polished than the stealth sections. The name REANIMAL is extremely literal, with animals in this world having been twisted into grotesque forms that are both familiar and horrifying. You'll encounter things that look like farm animals, but more wrong, wild creatures that behave unnaturally, and hybrids that blur the line between human and animal in deeply uncomfortable ways. What makes it effective is that the horror isn't just visual, it's behavioural. And creatures move unpredictably. They make unsettling sounds, and sometimes seem curious, but other times aggressive, and sometimes almost sad. There's no cheap jump scares dominating this experience, and instead the game leans into dread and discomfort. And some players encounters stick with you long after you stop playing. The bosses are less about fighting and more about surviving cinematic sequences. Running, hiding, solving things under pressure, and escaping collapsing environments. It's all very dramatic and often incredibly memorable, and these moments are easily some of the best parts of the game. If you play this game with a good set of headphones, it does transform the experience. Music is used sparingly, and most of the tension comes from the environmental sound, with wind through broken structures, distant metallic creaks, and water movement, along with creature noises that feel disturbingly organic. Sometimes the scariest thing in this game is hearing something that you can't see. But silence is also used brilliantly too, and when the game goes quiet, it kind of feels like the whole world is holding its breath. REANIMAL's built in Unreal Engine 5, and as a result the game looks incredible, with lighting being a standout, fog rolling through environments, and harsh industrial lights cutting through darkness, with muted oppressive colour palettes. But the character animation is also fantastic, and the kids do feel fragile and expressive, even without visible faces or dialogue. The downside? Well, some objects do blend into the environment, and that can make puzzles or navigation more frustrating than they should be. In REANIMAL, you can choose to play solo with an AI partner, or with a friend. And surprisingly, the AI is actually pretty competent. It keeps up and helps with puzzles and rarely gets stuck. But co-op is where it really changes the tone. Horror becomes less isolating when there's someone else there with you. It's still tense, but not quite as oppressive. So solo feels more immersive and co-op feels more strategic. And both are valid ways to experience this game. The opening hours are fantastic in REANIMAL. Focused, intense, and tightly designed. And then the game expands with more exploration, vehicle sections and larger environments. And some players will love that added variety, whilst others may miss the laser-focused dread of the earlier sections. The experience can feel slightly bloated compared to the razor-sharp design that Tarsier is known for. It's nothing just catastrophic, but there are also some annoyances, with camera awkwardness, occasional clipping, and weird physics. They don't break the game, but they do chip away at the immersion. Under all the grotesque imagery, the heart of the game is the relationship between the siblings. Moments of quiet vulnerability, helping each other up, pausing after danger, and staying close in dark areas, give the experience an emotional weight. It is bleak, yes, but it's not completely hopeless. Ultimately, REANIMAL is not just Little Nightmares. It's bigger, darker and more ambitious, but also a little rough around the edges. It delivers some of the most memorable horror imagery in recent games, but it sacrifices clarity and polish along the way. If you love atmosphere, environmental storytelling, and unsettling experiences, this game's absolutely worth your attention. But if you want tight mechanics and clear narrative direction, or constant forward momentum, you may find this frustrating. For me, well, I found it deeply disturbing, highly intriguing, and I'm really curious to see where it goes. If you've played REANIMAL, let me know what you think so far in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.